Sounds good.
Welcome back to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. I'm back with Julie Hulburd for some more retail cannabis talk here. Julie, I want to start to just kind of run through. I thought maybe we'd start at the seed to sale tracking thing. I read a story just the other day that said this is a question I've got a ton of, that licensed cultivators will be given the green light to sell seeds and clones to other licensed cultivators and wholesalers.
So, are you talking about like retail, other licensed cultivators?
This was a Heady, Vermont story from June 3rd. And that was a direct quote that I read off of their story.
Wow. So I think that you can transfer those things within the supply chain. And here's where I feel like I should probably look this up now. I thought what you were going to talk about was selling it like retail. Like only retail folks can sell it like commercially into commerce, right? So
selling clones and stuff.
Yes. So the only people who can sell it to the general public are retailers. So in terms of inter-supply chain, though, that I think has always been the case. Like you could cultivate and so forth.
Yeah, I was hoping, boy, I've been asked that a lot, and it's like, that's one that it's really been tricky to stay on top of. We were talking about nursery licenses, and it seemed like a lot of people were pushing for that.
Yep. So yeah, so we had nursery license was a recommendation that we made that didn't end up in the legislation this year.
You pushed that.
I think we pulled back on it a little bit this year, at least from, my own perspective. And I wouldn't say that this is the perspective of the board. At some point, I got a little bit worried about how many rules can we write and roll out this market without having too much all at once. So that's kind of my own perspective on that.
Now, I talked to a gentleman named Olin Schumacher from Few True Seeds down south, Brandon, maybe. I was asking him about the correct way to store and package seeds. And he said they need to be stored at low temperatures, dry. He says he keeps them in the freezer. Does the state or the listen, and I'm not trying to talk you into putting a bunch of more rules in place here, but I thought that was an interesting point, and I was wondering if you guys have any guidance on that.
Yeah, I don't think we do. I don't think that we had either written guidance, or I know that we haven't written rules about that. To some degree, I would say we need to think about how much regulation we want, right? So if there is an optimal way to store seeds that makes them more appealing and better for the market, well, some of that stuff should come from the market, right? If you find a niche, you should be able to sell that into the market. And if somebody has a way of storing seeds or develop whatever it is. So, sometimes folks ask us to write rules about specific things. And when I get that question, I say, think about whether or not you want that regulated, because once it's regulated, it'll be regulated forever.
Listen, I had a couple questions like this. Like, I don't know if I want to put ideas in their head.
Right. So I don't, maybe today that's what folks are saying about seeds, but there might be something else that's discovered in the future that is another way to keep and store seeds. Like, I feel like the cannabis industry is probably one of the fastest developing industries out there. People discover new ways of doing things all of the time. And it's amazing. So why would we want to hinder that?
So if you have to be a licensed cultivator, you couldn't sell seeds to someone who is a home grow. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, that's right.
Why not? Do you know the rationale for that?
I think the idea was, well, I don't know the rationale. I was going to try to make one up or try to guess what the
don't bullshit with me, Julie.
I was going to try and guess what the thought process was in terms of why that piece of the legislation was written that way, and I don't really know because I wasn't there.
I'd rather you say you don't know. I respect that.
Yeah, I don't really know because I wasn't there, and there were probably 75 conversations before it landed the way it landed.
Okay, cool. Maybe we could follow up on that question. Let's go on to the big question on everyone's mind, I think, is the outdoor licenses here. I've just been here. I'm getting blown up by these guys. I'm sure you kind of hear where they're at. You've got guys, they want to get their plants in the ground. They said May 1st was, although I do think, to be fair, I think some people got a little bit ahead of themselves. No one was promised a license on May 1st. I do think there are some people that maybe overextended themselves. But I also understand the frustration. We have a very short growing season. They've got, if they can't get their plants in the ground, they're just going to bleed money till the next year. And, they might have to take on some more debt to hold them over or something.
Yeah.
What would you say to these people that are waiting on the outdoor licenses?
This is what keeps me up at night too. So and our staff is working at like full tilt on the weekends, late in the evenings, trying to process licenses as quickly as possible. We do have to be really careful. Like, we have to process these licenses and these applications perfectly. I mean, like, we really have to do this really well, because there are still a lot of naysayers out there. There are folks out there that are just waiting for all of this to crash and burn. And if we're not very careful, and if we don't follow our own rules to a T, if we don't, really go through the process as we've planned it, we risk everybody, right? And that's on us. So it does take time. And I think that's why I was talking a little bit about the efficiencies in the application, because some of that was just some of that back and forth was taking up staff time. Now it's a little bit more efficient, and you can see every week we have a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more to approve. So hopefully those efficiencies will help us move a little bit faster through that process. But we have a small staff, and they're all, I mean, I've never been so impressed with a group of people who worked so hard on something that was just so hard,
I was going to say that's what she said, but I'll leave that out.
Oh,
All right. This is fun. I'm getting loose now. See, I was nervous. I don't know why. It gave me butterflies at the beginning.
My brother makes that joke and I yell at him.
It never gets old.
I will spare you.
I got to laugh at you, so that's all that matters.
No.
Here's a comment I've heard from a couple people. Most of these people have asked me not to use their names, but I've taken a bunch of questions. This guy says, he suggested that maybe the board should have prioritized the outdoor growers above the social equity applicants just for the time crunch, because there were so many of them, and time is kind of the essence here. And according to the state projections, at least, they were projecting we need this massive amount of outdoor to satisfy the demand for the market. Any thoughts on that?
So the legislature told us to prioritize social equity first. And so we've done that, right? They asked us to do that first. They did say also, though, that we could make adjustments to that based on the needs of the market. So we've done that too. So we're trying to prioritize social equity, economic empowerment, and then outdoor growers. So I think folks probably saw that on Monday we had they're called standard applications, meaning they don't fall into the social equity or economic empowerment. And so
those were the first ones, right? The first.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So I think you'll see more of those coming, and we're continuing to prioritize social equity, economic empowerment. And the way I think it's working is, they start working on an application. Maybe there's something more that's needed. They reach out to that person while they're waiting. They start on another one, so there's a continuous movement.
Boy, so let me ask you, what do you got? 600 or so applications?
We had at one point something like 600 pre-qualification applications. I think a lot of folks have abandoned those pre-qualification applications for one of two reasons. One is
withdrawn.
Yeah, withdrawn them, because either they have just moved to filling out their full application, particularly if they're a small cultivator, they've probably moved, or if they're are already in the application process, or they sort of started an application to see what it was all about, and realized that they maybe needed to make a business plan and come back later.
Have you had any outdoor growers pull their license applications because of the delays?
So not that I know of, but I have not asked our staff that question specifically.
Okay. Maybe I'll take that to the next one, whoever emails me back next. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's something a couple of people asked me about. Let's see. Boy, these a lot of notes. Let's talk about, here's another super hot topic, and I know this is one that's out of your hand. I realize some of this stuff is baked into the legislation, but we got to talk about the THC caps and maybe the vape tax a little bit too.
The vape tax.
Yeah, the vape tax. I know that's not your fault either, but here's a quote that I jotted down from a story earlier. Solid and liquid concentrate cannabis products with greater than 60% THC may be produced by a licensee and sold to another licensee in accordance with subchapter 3 of this chapter, but shall not be sold to the public by a licensed retailer or integrated licensee. So you can make these concentrates and you can only sell them in between businesses. Is that what I'm hearing?
Except I think for vapes, right? Doesn't that
Yeah,
section?
right. That's the liquid
Yeah.
vape tax, I believe, or the cap was lifted on those.
Right. So, but yes, you can sell them inter-supply chain. So, the hope was, right, and we as a board supported a lift of the caps. We brought in some folks, some regulators from other states to kind of speak to the legislature about this, testify. Pepper testified on it several times.
I think everybody did. Like, really?
There was a lot of conversation about it. And that's where it landed, is that they were willing to go with inter-supply chain, a lift of the inter-supply chain, or raising the inter-supply chain so that it could be used in edibles. So at least one concern is addressed there, right? So one concern that I heard early on was, okay, so if you can't produce a concentrate that's more than 60%, then I'm going to have to use more of it to make my whatever, my brownie, my cookie, my candy, whatever, my, you know,
like you got to water your carts down or whatever. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of people.
Yeah, so at least with inter-supply chain, I think if it's going into something else, that is helpful. But you know, we have another legislative session coming. There will be a whole new group of, not necessarily a whole group, but a lot of new folks there. There'll be new chairs of the various committees, and we'll see what happens in the next session.
So I could make a concentrate and I can just sell it to a retailer and he could put it into some gummies or something. Or what are we talking about? Yeah.
That's what I understand it to mean. Yeah. So if you were to make like the oil to go into the gummies, that's inter-supply chain. You couldn't sell that oil to the consumer. So for dabs, for example, like that can't be, that was not lifted. The THC cap on that was not lifted.
So let me ask you this. Doesn't that sort of set up a situation where the manufacturers can't really set the price for their own goods and they're forced to just sort of take whatever a retailer will get? I mean, it seems like it doesn't let them shop around as much, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure I understand what that means. I mean, it depends on who's manufacturing and how, you know, and how many people are manufacturing. I suppose maybe what you're saying is that sort of like the entrepreneurial demand for manufacturing will go down a little bit, right? If people can't produce what they want. And that was one of the points we tried to make to the legislature. And that doesn't that just continue with the illicit market? Doesn't the legacy market just carry on as it currently is? I mean, our goal was to move as much as possible into the regulated market. If we don't lift the THC caps, will that really happen? Can we meet the goal that the legislature set out for us? Do we have all the tools to do that?
Yeah, and then the tax thing also, it was like, that seems like if you're just gonna smash the vape tax on there, like I'm not gonna go buy something like, what is it, 90 something percent?
Yeah, I think it's 92%. And then there's also the cannabis excise tax. So you're talking about a huge, I mean, what does that end up being? Like 108%, 100 and
Wow, I forgot. I didn't even think that you have to also put the other tax on the vape tax.
And then let's say you buy it in a town that has a 1% local options tax.
Oh,
so
Jesus.
Then you're talking about a product that is really just taxed.
So you sell it for $50 and the government's like, yeah, you actually owe us $10 after that.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it will continue to be an issue that, you know, maybe once we have a year's worth of data to go and show the legislature, and maybe once we have a year's worth of data to say, like, look, we legalized cannabis, and just like in other states, like it was okay, you know, if we have all that data to show the legislature, because some of this is a little bit like, we don't know how this is going to affect us. We don't know how this is going to affect Vermont. There is a little bit of that like fear and stigma that exists still. And so maybe with some data, we can go back and say, look, here, it was okay. The regulated market rolled out. Everybody's okay. Can we do this now?
Nobody's dead still. Now, yeah, see, that was a dumb question I asked back there. So I have to work on that one. Damn.
There are no dumb questions. There are not.
Yeah, we'll get there. So let me ask you about this, because I've seen a bunch of recalls from Curaleaf recently, who owns a couple of our medical licenses. They had a big, in multiple states, Florida, I believe Pennsylvania, had big recalls for using unapproved additives in their vape cartridges. Are there additives that the state has banned from using in vape cartridges or smokables?
I think that there were some things that were not allowed in the legislation. And then I think that what we were planning to do is come up with a list. And I can't remember if we've posted the guidance yet or not. I know that there is a ton of research that's being done. I think it's in Oregon, about additives in vapes. And we were kind of hoping that would come out sooner rather than later, but I don't think it's going to come out until like September. So I don't see that guidance posted, but I know that I think it's Pepper that's working on that. But I know it's coming.
You know what I was also curious about, Julie, was, the input water, because I've also heard that there's no regulation on input water that's going into any kind of cultivation. And that was kind of jumping ahead too, but that just came to mind. I thought, it seems like they're testing for a lot of stuff, although not water, which is I feel like is pretty important to a plant. And I noticed there's a lot of contaminated water sites around Vermont, especially in Montpelier. Boy, they got PFAS contamination down in Bennington. There's a Superfund contaminated site down there. Did you guys ever talk about regulating the input water?
I don't think so. I don't remember talking about that, but I do feel like in the rules, there is something that talks about potable water and following. So there are lots of places in our rules where we connected what cannabis establishments have to follow to other rules that already existed, right? This is trying to not make a whole new rule when something else is already out there. So I feel like that was in rule 2, but I'm just going to look it up.
Yeah, please do. That was kind of out of order, but we're bouncing around a little. A lot of this stuff just ties in, and I was like, I don't know how to organize it.
It's all, I do that too. Like when I did the presentation for VLCT, I was like, I'm not really sure where to start. Like I could just start anywhere.
That's exactly what I was having the problem. I was trying to organize all these. I should have wrote them down in order, but people were just hitting me up. I dump them in an email, and then it's like, oh, now I have 200 questions all out of order.
We'll bounce around.
Yeah, we will.
So they do. So the tier 5 and 6 cultivators have to, in their application, talk about where their water is coming from. And if it's on-site water, they have to give some information. I mean, in absence of like reading this rule, but it's for your viewers who would like to look it up, it's 1.5.2.
Cool.
So it's in rule 1 and it's 1.5.2 and it's water and wastewater requirements. I don't think it quite gets to what you are specifically talking about. Like this rule doesn't necessarily say that you have to test the water that's coming into your facility. But it does say that you have to say whether or not your establishment has to comply with the indirect discharge and underground injection control rules by the Department of Environmental Conservation. So there's one of the places where we were like, okay, rules already exist around this. And then for indoor cultivators, it's very similar. And then it talks about, I think this is talking about water and wastewater. But it talks about, something very similar. So we did try to connect to
maybe you could send me that.
Yeah. It's 1.5.2.
Okay, cool. It's been so hard to keep up with you guys. And boy,
no kidding.
My head's already spinning and I've only been doing this for like 6 months, maybe. And I can't imagine what's going on in your guys' head. Kyle looks a little frustrated sometimes during the meeting. He looks like he just like wants to get stuff done,
Yeah, well, we all feel like that. Yeah, we all feel like that. You can only move as fast as you can move, though. Like, we're all human, and our staff is, like I said, I keep saying this, they're working really hard.
Now, Julie, you mentioned on the phone that you said there were a lot of regulations or a lot of suggestions you made to the legislature that didn't get taken up. One of them you said was the concentrates, and then that didn't get taken up. What else were you guys trying to push to them?
So we've talked about some of that, like the medical pieces. We sent some recommendations to the legislature around the medical stuff, increasing the plant count and some other things. We had like 3 reports that we had to do for the legislature. Let me just find them all, because this is now months ago. And, some of them had to do with the concentrates. Oh, delivery was another one that was included in there.
I was going to ask you
Um,
about that too. Yeah.
Yep. And, so those are probably the big ones. I think that there were some others that we made that were not as huge. We made some technical corrections or requests, but really the medical stuff that we recommended ended up in a bill that didn't really go anywhere. And then the concentration caps, which you followed, and then some of the other additional license types that we recommended, I think some of those we recommended for this year, and then some of those I'd have to look at the report. Some of those we said, this could be a future license type when this market rolls out. Because in reality, we wrote this first set of rules in record time. I don't know that we can keep up that pace all the time, right? I don't know if we can. I don't know if we can do that for like the next set of rules.
Right.
So we have to write rules around delivery.
So delivery, is that going to be allowed?
No, it didn't. It did not go through the legislature, but online ordering did. So we will have to write some rules around that.
Did they take you up on any of your suggestions in the legislature? Like, what's your batting average when going in there?
Well, democracy is about compromise, right? So I wouldn't say that.
So you're batting like 100?
There was compromise. Not everything got taken up, but things did get addressed. Like the hemp program will ultimately come under the Cannabis Control Board. So that will allow us to sort of regulate. That was one of the suggestions, is that we be able to regulate the hemp and the CBD and then the novel cannabinoids. And then, I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Oh, the small cultivators who are already farms will be able to be considered farms, right? So if they meet certain conditions, there's certain conditions that they have to meet, that they have to be, an already existing farm. But like, that was something that we recommended to the legislature that went through. So there is like it's all about compromise.
Is that frustrating?
Yes and no. I mean, if I hadn't just read a book on like Constitution and how like this is what it was intended to be, right? And democracy was intended
Sometimes I think those ideas are old, Julie. But no, I feel you. I feel you.
Democracy was intended to be a slow and thoughtful process, right? The idea was that a group of people couldn't force things through. I mean, I know that we sometimes feel like that happens anyway, but the idea was that the public would be engaged in what happens, and you have to take time to do that.
And that's what I was saying about sort of nominating all the members of the board in private. That was kind of the point I was after. It's like, why don't we get a voice? This has negatively impacted us. We're the ones who have been harassed by the cops and arrested and had our shit stolen and had our money taken. It's like, had the civil asset forfeiture. It's like, that's just my perspective, and that makes my blood boil a little bit. But I get all the sides of the argument. It's just like there's still a lot of old ideas, I think, that we could just do away with. Where are we at, Julie? Packaging. We're getting in there. Yeah, when I first met you, you pulled out a little package in the office and you were showing me a package from Maine or something, and we were talking about that. And I know that's been a big issue. And I'm not sure where we landed on all the plastic stuff, and I was hoping maybe you could tell me.
So you can't. It has to be reusable. That's in Rule 2. I feel like
you're going to do that like the ocean reclaim?
Well, no, but there is Kyle's working on a waiver process for that. So folks will be able to apply for a waiver, but in order to apply for a waiver, you kind of have to demonstrate that you have tried something else. Like I heard it's not available. It's not in the market. There's not enough of it. They're back. There has to be some reason that you're applying for a waiver. But yeah, it does have to be reusable.
What if it's not affordable? Is that a reason to apply for a waiver?
And I think our last meeting, Pepper said money alone is not the issue. But I think I think we'd probably come to a supply chain issue before we came to an affordable. I feel like the market's going to meet this, but I think it's going to take time for the market to meet that, right? So I feel like supply chain would happen first.
So do we have any packaging companies in Vermont? I've tried to find some, and I don't really think I've found any.
Yeah, I don't know. The packaging that I've seen, I'm trying to remember if it came from Vermont or not. I don't think it did. Although people have been able to,
I haven't met any packaging companies.
Yeah.
I heard rumors
Not
of a
that are
guy, but
making like, yeah, not that are making reusable packaging.
well, I saw a guy
Um,
who was making hemp plastic, but I think it
Mhm.
was just from California and he slapped his logo
Oh,
on it.
oh.
So I didn't count that. But anyway, that's going to be even like all the little pre-roll joints, all those little glass tubes, all the stickers, all the tops, all of the little thing, the little things they put concentrates in, the labeling, it's a lot of stuff. Um, it seems like a kind of like a big expense, especially like, plastic's obviously the cheapest option. You use those Mylar bags, and those are actually child resistant too,
Yeah.
which is the nice thing about them. They have a tear top, and then the
Yep.
zippers, like sometimes I can't even get in that fucking zipper. Um, you know, but then you guys were saying like if you had edibles, right, and there's 10 milligrams of edibles per package, you have to be able to open and close it, or 10 servings, you have to be able to open and close it 10 times without it breaking.
Yeah. So if there's multiple servings, you have to be able to open and close it multiple times, right?
Sure.
Although one thing that you just said made me think, and I hadn't thought about this before. I know plastic is maybe the cheapest to purchase at the get-go, but part of this packaging plan is that people will be able to bring back the packaging and it can be reused. So I wonder if over time that would actually be true. So if you buy a glass jar and it gets used, and it's $1 and it gets used 100 times because it can be sanitized and reused, it may in the long run actually end up being cheaper than the plastic. I don't
Right.
know that, but
However,
that's a possibility.
this is an interesting point that Devin Daly raised. And also sanitizing also costs money. So that's another energy input that you have to do. And then you got to put new stickers on, and maybe you got to use a new top on your or whatever. And then, he said the shipping costs of these materials, he said, if I can get 2,000 plastic bags in a box this big, and that, it like takes up no space on a boat. If you get 10, the same amount of glass jars, he's like, it take up half a pallet. It takes more energy inputs to get
Yeah.
here. And I don't know the cost benefit ratio because that math is hard,
Yeah,
but I thought it was an interesting point,
it
it's
is
like
an interesting point. Yeah. I think we felt like this was something we had to do. I mean, this is cutting edge for our market. And I think we really felt like the packaging market will meet it. It might take them a minute, but I think that they'll meet it. I think this is the direction things are going in general.
And now I feel like I saw a story that the flour doesn't need to be in a child resistant opaque container, or is it just
That's
child
right.
resistant? Or
So flour can be in a child deterrent package. So it's tear resistant packaging that can be sealed in a manner that would deter children under 5 years of age from easily accessing the content.
tear
within-
resistant packaging.
Tear resistant.
So give me some examples of tear resistant packaging.
So I wonder if not Mylar, but if there is some type of I'm trying to think of like a paper that's tear resistant that's not lined with plastic, right? Like remember when McDonald's came out with like their recyclables, like containers that really had plastic in the middle. It just looked recyclable on the outside.
You might be a little older than me, Juliana.
That was like an early 80s thing. Dating myself.
Oh
But,
no, I was 84, so that was, I don't know if I had McDonald's yet.
Sorry. Yeah, so I don't know. I would have to, I don't know. I think the hope was that you would be able to put flour in something that is not necessarily child resistant. And the compromise is child deterrent.
Let me
Right.
ask you this, because you mentioned McDonald's. I want to talk about advertising to children.
Yep.
Because McDonald's blatantly advertises to children with clowns and Happy Meals, and they feed them dog shit food that's probably worse than eating an edible of weed. Sugar companies, you go to the store, you'll see like all the Frosted Flakes and the cartoons, SpongeBob Cheerios on the bottom, and they put it right at the eye level with the kids. They put the candy right at the register, so your kid has to walk by it and bug you on the way out. All of these other industries blatantly advertise to children. And I'm not saying that you should advertise weed to children. I don't think anybody really wants kids. I don't think they want having weed, but like, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that when so many other people are blatantly doing this with very kind of addictive products.
Yeah, I don't, Nobody asked me to regulate McDonald's or sugary drinks, right? But
I'll get Department of Health back on next
world
week.
could be a different place. I will say I've had that. I mean, I think I told you I have high school aged kids, and it's like the energy drinks are like all the rage, but it like elevates your heart rate. It like if and watching kids during exam week like chug those energy drinks, like it's a disaster waiting to happen because they're already anxious.
Caffeine. Let me tell you something,
Yes,
Julie. In
it's
college, my
awful.
friends worked at UMass Medical School. They got a hold of some raw caffeine powder from the lab. They were studying addiction with mice, and they brought it home. And we were like, yeah, well, let's try some of that, and let me tell you, that shit is what we had to throw it in the toilet, which was weird. I never turned out. It was, it is so addictive. Really, like it started
Yes.
with just sprinkling a little in our orange juice or in the water. We're like, that's nice. And then, of course, it's like, wow, we should maybe do a line, and it's bad.
Yeah.
So we had to throw that out away. It's so addictive. And we give that to kids, no problem. Colorful
Yeah.
cans, they got every color of the rainbow on there.
Yeah.
Do
Well,
you
it
think
is a fight for parents, right? Like you're right about the grocery store. Like you have to constantly but as it relates to cannabis, I do think we have a responsibility, like we're responsible for each other, right? Like, we have a responsibility not to ensure that this is not more appealing to children than potentially than it needs to be or than it already is, right? Like the very mysterious nature of it, right, is appealing to some kids, right? So let's not make it any more appealing, or let's not normalize it for children while we're trying to destigmatize it for everybody else, right? Those are two different things. So I guess I feel like we have a responsibility to kind of learn the lessons of like the cigarette companies and not repeat that sort of like, again, like early to mid 80s, everyone in my class had a Joe Camel t-shirt, everybody, and they were
that
collecting
was so
Joe Camel
cool?
bucks. But then I don't know how many of them smoked, but like,
No, grandma did.
it's sort of bizarre to watch a junior high school full of kids with, cigarette swag. That's not okay. And it did normalize cigarette smoking for sort of my generation. There were a lot of us that smoked cigarettes early on, right? So if we want to destigmatize cannabis for like in general, let's not normalize it for children while we're doing that. Kids still need to know, like, this is not for you. It's for later. Like you can do this, but later.
Do you think 21 is a good age limit?
It seems like it. It seems like that is between 21 and like 25 or when the brain is really sort of like done developing. The most rapid development happens, I think it's in like toddlerhood and then again in adolescence. So if kids can get through adolescence, the prevention community has some data that says that if you can get through adolescence, you're less likely to have, other substance issues when you get older, and it's supposed to be better for your brain. And that is probably true. I mean, generally anything that you can do that's healthy for your brain while it's developing is probably good for you. Even eating good vegetables and fruits and things like that, that also counts towards healthy brain development. So I do think 21 is probably fine. I think between 21 and 25 is when the brain is done developing. And so that makes sense to me.
I'm going to lay this on you because I read a number of studies suggesting that mice will select sugar over cocaine when they're locked in they do an experiment. They will go for the sugar every time. And it's like, okay, so if we're going to consider cannabis as like something that's dangerous to the developing brain and something that could potentially be addictive or cause depression or all of these hypotheses that are floating around, what about sugar? Are we creating generations of young addicts? Is that their first addiction? I think that was my first addiction. I love sugar, and I tried to stop eating it last year, and I missed it so much. You don't realize it until it's gone, and then I'm constantly reaching for, I like candy, all that stuff. Do you think it's a little hypocritical to feed kids or Adderall? I like to use an example. They're giving kids Adderall, like school kids, because they won't pay attention in class. Like Adderall is very addictive. We know about that. We don't need more science. We know the effects. We know your teeth will fall out and, shit like that. Do you think that's a little hypocritical of the state to take that position?
So nobody asked me to regulate sugar. I might say, I don't know enough about it to say if it's hypocritical or not. I mean, I feel like most of the parents I know, at least as it relates to sugar, most of the parents I know try really hard to deter their kids from eating sugar for as long as they possibly can. That was not like, Hawaiian punch was like the thing when I was a kid, right? Like,
I was gonna say, I work in a restaurant, and that is not the reality of the situation I
oh,
see.
really? Well, so it just seems like, I mean, it just seems like that, well, maybe this is just my own experience. Like I made baby food when my kids were little, like I made my own because there was too much sugar in the baby food, but that was my choice, right? Like, I feel like most of the parents I knew were trying to do that. Like the book about making baby food I got from a friend, but that may just be my experience.
So have you talked to your kids about cannabis, or how do you approach your kid? We got 4 minutes left. Tell me how
Yeah.
you talk to your kids about cannabis.
Well, there's no better way to ruin something for an adolescent than be the mom that regulates it. I will tell you
Oh,
that.
shit. Oh, boy.
Of course. I mean, my parenting approach is always to be honest with my kids. So, when they were really little, were they aware of, any kind of cannabis? I mean, I was not, like I said, my use is so occasional that I don't think it's not when they're here. It's never done when they're here. Like it's not, they know that it's here. Their stepdad is a more regular user than I am. And they know that he uses it, but he doesn't do it in front of them intentionally. Like we made some intentional parenting choices around that. It's locked up in our house. They don't have access to it.
Wow, you keep it away from your children.
It's locked
Imagine,
up.
imagine that, huh? Parents
Well,
taking responsibility for their own shit. Wow.
yes, we've made adult choices and we've done, but also, I'm extra sure that it's locked up if they have friends over, right?
Sure.
Like I double check the lock. I lock the room that it's in, even though it's locked. So,
Lock
you
the
know,
kids in their room and
so it's just, yes, that is a parenting choice. It is a parenting choice I made. I do think, people do the best what they have, but I was also raised by pretty open parents too, who had open conversations with me about things. Not everybody had that experience.
Me too. We grew up around some hippies, yo, Uncle Jimmy's cigarette smells funny. Like that's not a clove.
Yeah. Well, I will say that there was no cannabis smoking in my house. My mom would have flipped out, but the she was worried about having cannabis on my resume. So just, like
My mom was always telling me that you get drug charges, then you can't get student loans and this and that. And it's like, shit, if I got a drug charge, they would have never given me student loans and I wouldn't have $100,000 in debt right now. Maybe I should have got some drug charges.
Well, there was a time that some of that was more true than it is now. Thankfully, some of that's changing.
Listen, I'd like to keep going if you want to go. I got retail, it's social equity questions. How you feeling?
I think I can do one more.
One more?
How about
All right,
that?
beautiful.
All right.
All right,
talk to
I'll
you
set
later.
it up. Yeah,
All right.
cool.